Hi, welcome to MEDIASPACE. I think it's 3 for the EURONET series. I'm broadcasting here from outside the television studio, the HOTV Centre. It's an outside broadcast almost, and we'll be going in very soon because it's freezing out here and I think it's going to rain as well. The reason we're starting out here is because I want to talk about some of the issues to do with new media and those that link to issues to do with architecture. And it's just so happens that this building, oops, I've knocked the flag off. This building here is actually the School of Architecture as well as the TV studio. Over there we have the place where all the students live, and REBA's actually here as well, the local branch of the Architectural Association. And what I've done here is I've modelled the building just so you get an idea of where we are. This is sort of an architectural model. It's made of Lego, as you can see, and we're standing just about here on this model. I don't know if you can see that. The whole building was originally something to do with the military, it's a mess hall or something, and this room here, where the TV studio is actually the old ballroom. We have some competition from the local fauna and wildlife. This model here is interesting, I think, because it highlights some of the issues to do with navigation within architecture and also the real world, and some of those to do with web stuff. The idea behind this program is that we're going to be exploring architectural issues, but also issues to do with web design, and look at some of the structures which underpin both of them. In the sense of this building here, it's appropriate in many ways that we have a School of Architecture right next to a TV studio, because in many ways this TV studio, in terms of its expansion into the real world through broadcast technologies, is an extension of architecture. And the issues that we've been talking about with this program have been about those new dimensions that new media is actually expanding for us. Some of the issues to do with architecture then that parallel web design, well, architects might not agree with it, but I think a lot of new web designers are looking for a theory to underpin what is basically technology and a production process. It's devoid of theory. Most theory to do with computing, it's database theory or process engineering theory, but very dull. If we're looking at a cultural identity for new media, then it has to look at other traditional media forms. So for instance, we're looking at architecture, which has many interesting parallels, one of which of course is that most architecture never actually exists in the real world. It only exists as models, like this one here. Well, maybe a bit better than this one. But those models never get built because of financial or just the competitions that architects enter into. The competition is of course extremely difficult to actually get these things built because they're very expensive. Web design, although many web pages exist, they don't actually exist in reality, so they are models of things. Issues to do with navigation through spaces as well. When you move around a building, as indeed this building here suggests we are here, which is right here, which is just outside the TV studio, you need some sense of location, some sense of space, and some sense of place. And the issues that we'll be looking at later in the program try to deal with new ways of thinking about web pages, new ways of thinking about new media, new ways of navigating around these things. And also new issues to do with the notion of what a model actually is. We've done some work with architects in the past, and one issue that came up was that a VRML model didn't quite classify as a real model for architects to deal with. And of course this here is a model, it's a real model, but is it any more real than a virtual model that exists in cyberspace? Okay, I'm just going to take a photograph of Chris here, and I'll be documenting this program throughout and hopefully constructing pages as we go. So say hi, Chris. All right, you're on candid camera. Okay, we're going to go back into the studio now because it really is cold, and see you in a few minutes. Okay, here we are in the TV studio, which we were just outside through the back door. And if you can see on my model here, this is where we were, and this is now, you can see in there, where we are right now. And if I look up, I can just see a very large hand coming through the ceiling there. Oh, there we are. Okay, so issues to do with navigation, issues to do with modeling, issues to do with representations of the real world. I'll just ditch this and we'll move on with the program. Right, on the chroma key here, I'd just like to remind you of some of the issues that we're trying to look at. Here's the model of the place where we now are. And if you want to ring into that place, if you want to actually get in touch with us, please do so. Just behind me here, you're going to fade me out. Here we go. We have the ISDN number for phone calls if you want to make a video conference into us. That number is 0175, sorry, that's ISDN 01752 260031. The telephone number, if you want to phone in, and please do. If you're watching this on the web, please phone in. It's just an 8-second delay between now and when you're listening to it, which is about now, I think. So the telephone number is 01752 233 646. If you are looking at us on the website through the web broadcast, then obviously you know the URL for this page. But if you're not, I'll read that out to you because you might be watching this in one of the ratio centers. The URL for the page is http:// there's no www, it's just Kaya Star, that's CAIIA -star, STAR, .soc.plim.ac.uk, and that's in the project section. If you look at the menu there, it's the project section and within MEDIASPACE within one of those projects, and it's the current edition of MEDIASPACE, which is the EURONET programs. So we're looking at this program on the satellite, and maybe we're looking at it on the web page as well. And that is really some of the issues that I would like to deal with through this. I'm on my Todd in the studio today, back at the Kirkby Place, where the web page is actually based on the server there. Angelica is hopefully setting up this and streaming it over the web. Chris, who was on last month's program, I think it was. Yes, must have been last month's program, 100 years ago from now. Chris is there as well, and Georgie will be on later programs too. And I'd like to thank Martin as well, who helped set up the streaming web server for us. I do actually have a photograph of him to put on the back here, but it was taken on New Year's Eve party, and it's probably not suitable for broadcast. Okay, so issues to do with web design, issues to do with broadcasting, media publication. There is a heritage for new media, and we've tried to address those in previous programs, and I'd like to focus in on some of the production issues. What I'll be doing in this program is looking at issues to do with this structure that we're in now, the TV studio, and the structures that exist within the TV studio. I'd also like to look at paper-based publishing, and finally look at web design, and ultimately we'll be doing a web workshop which will be generating some web pages, going through slicing of images, image maps, maybe some inclusion of plugins like QuickTime VR, and also VRML. And we'll be looking at the structures of those web pages. The reason we're looking at the structures of broadcast media and also publishing is that web design inherits a lot from that heritage. If you look at this kind of situation that we're in now, we're doing a satellite broadcast, we can see that it's paralleled by the broadcast that's happening on the web page. We're streaming video. It's actually a streaming video of this broadcast. And if we look at paper-based publishing, the whole notion of text on paper has been transferred to the web, where we're talking about text on screen. And those building blocks here, if we look at the screen behind me here, are very much to do with the same building blocks that are used to make models, Lego models, virtual reality models, and one of the models we'll be building in 3D is a model of a Lego brick. Okay, now what we're going to do is have a quick deconstruction of the TV studio. here I am standing here in this little box. Where has it gone? There it is. It's this little box that surrounds me, and you're watching this. But in order for this image and this sound to get to you, it has to go through a fairly complicated process. It's a complicated process that has history behind it and has evolved significantly. And this type of program, which is hopefully interactive if you communicate with us, marks a sort of step forward in that development of broadcasting. The model is basically one to many, the notion of broadcasting. Well, this is really referred to as narrowcasting when you're dealing with a satellite, because there's only a certain number of reception sites to pick up this digital signal. But while we do that, I'd just like to talk through some of the issues to do with this. I'll take my camera with me as well. Here we go. Right, just go up to Tara here. Hi, Tara. This is a TV camera. As you can see, it is the height of sleek, modern, lightweight camera design. It's got an auto cue thing at the front. Can we see that over there? It's a bit dark on the screen. It has an auto cue at here. It's a bit difficult for me to read my lines off this at the moment because obviously I'm not reading my lines at all. But this is an auto cue setup, which means that I could read my lines off it. I'm just going to take a photograph of Tara here. There we go. Okay, and this camera has the ability to move around the studio. It picks up an image through the lens. There's huge wires and cables here that run off up to the TV studio and the mixers. And over the other side of the room, Jules is pointing a camera. Oh, it's even darker over there. I can probably get a good image of it from here. Can you wave? There we go. Right. These images are then transferred up through various wires up to a control room at the top. And I think we're going to switch now to the control room. Here we go. Control room up there. Yeah, they're just finding the right buttons to press. And Dave Horrell, who's the director, there he is. Right, we're now up in the control room. I don't know if we can get myself up on chroma key on that, then I can talk through what's actually happening. Dave Horrell is up there. Oh, there we are. Right, Dave's up there. Can we see him? There he is. Don't press that button. Right, there we are. Right, he's pressing that button there. If he was to press that button, for instance, the whole screen will go wibbly. Well, it will go wibbly and wobbly if he had bothered to spend all that money on some new equipment instead of this whole TSW stuff. But he controls all the images here through this control bank. He views the images that are going out on all the cameras on the screen up here. Oh, that way. There we go. And if you can see, oh, there's me there. That's me without the chroma key behind it. Where's the one? Down, I can't see it actually. Oh, there I am, right, there. Right, that's me with the chroma key, which is actually being broadcast at this moment. Up here we've got the other source from my computer. And I don't know what these other ones are as well, but there's lots of foreign channels he watches in his spare time. If we swing around now, can we do that? Look at that, like QuickTime VR. Right, over here we have Jim, who's in the sound mixing unit. Right, Jim presses buttons, and if you can hear him, there's some music playing in the background. Ooh, look at that, amazing technology. I'll just walk around here so I can get a better view of it. He can see the program as well on the screen here. Where's it gone? Gosh, it's so difficult working with chroma key. Here we go, and Jim's fading up, and he's also mixing my voice up and down, so he's pressing that button now. It goes very quiet, and it goes very up again now. And it's right. I beat him to it. You have to do everything yourself here. And Jim has control over the audio that goes out to you as well. Now, this convention of broadcasting has been around since, well, just after Logie Baird's time and Marconi. And here we are in this, we're going to look at the studio window and we can see me waving. There I am waving. Oh, no, I can't. Oh, there's some speakers in the way. There we are. But this is a live broadcast, as you've probably guessed by now. And there I am waving. Look at that. That's recursion. That's exactly the same thing that happened with me and the model outside. Gosh, I can talk to myself. That's amazing. Right. We could spend hours doing this. So here we have a TV studio. It's a room, it's a ballroom, it's an old ballroom. It's right next to the School of Architecture, and there's a wire coming out of it, which now runs all the way up to Steve Roberts in the, what is that bit? The uplink bit. And he's got a box another room with tons of equipment there, and he's pressing buttons left, right, and center. Actually, he's got his feet up because it's all automatic, and it just streams out. It's all digital MPEG stuff. That is then sent out through a big thing on a lorry with a big dish on it, which is the satellite uplink. And that satellite uplink beams the image up to the satellite, which then distributes it over the satellite's footprint. That was a very technical, highly technical explanation of what we're actually watching now if you're looking at it on the satellite. What's actually happening as well, though, is that the signal is coming all the way back down to the uplink room, and Steve is monitoring that to ensure that it's of the utmost quality. It's a shame about the content that he has to put through it, but there we go. That's what you get for peanuts, Adrian. Okay, so the next stage, if we're looking at media, traditional media, is web stuff. And I'm going to move on. Sorry, it's not web stuff, is page stuff here. Oh, look, there's Dave and Roger there working with their height of, that's actually Logie Baird there. Okay, what we're going to look at now is page design for print. Print technologies have been around for a little bit longer than broadcast technologies, but effectively they communicate information through a technology, and it is the production process of the technology that actually interests us here today. This production process involves ink, involves paper, and involves lots of heavy sort of traffic to move the pieces of paper to shops where they're purchased by people. But again, the same model exists in that it's one publisher who distributes it to many recipients. The audience is fairly static in that sense. They receive the information. Exactly the same way as TV broadcasting is, except using a different kind of technology. What I'm going to do now is just talk you through some of the issues to do with page design, and then we'll move on to the web stuff. If I just sit down here, we can see behind me here I've got a page from Digital Creativity, which is the MEDIASPACE paper-based production. This paper that you can see has an image on it. Where's the image? Here's the image running down here, and also some text down this side of the screen here as well. This is actually called a page architecture. And again, we have maybe just use of words, semantics, but it indicates that the structures of things are actually significant in terms of their mechanical reproduction. This page here that you see before you was produced in the first MEDIASPACE, and it is fairly static in that the images run through 1, 2, 3, 4 columns there across a double page spread. This was constructed in PageMaker, and at the time the whole image was made out of imported text and images that were manipulated in Photoshop. This image here that you see here was actually taken, some of the images were taken from the studio. I think there's actually a picture of Jules there with a camera embedded in that. And these are some of the early presenters. There's Brian Eno and Roy Ascott and Tony Tucker taking part in that TV program there. They're all manipulated, taken from photographs into Photoshop, and then produced quite a high quality image, but in black and white, so that they can actually get the print resolution up. Here we have another one. This has rows instead of columns, and the rows run horizontally along the width of the paper here. And here we have a screen from PageMaker, which is where we're going to go now to talk about some of the issues to do with page layout. There are several competitors for the market of PageMaker. Quark, I'm using PageMaker here because I just happen to be more familiar with it. What I'll do is take you through the construction of a page or double page spread in PageMaker. The first thing you'll notice is that the way the technology is actually described, it uses things like where we've got page size, A4. Well, A4 is certainly significantly different from the screen sizes that you use when you're working with Dreamweaver, where you talk about pixel sizes. We're also talking about portraits or tall or wide. We're talking about double pages or facing pages. And we're talking down the bottom here about the output resolution. Now this is very important when you're producing a paper-based publication, because you're actually dealing with two technological processes. One lot of technology is to do with the digital side. Another piece of technology is to do with the print production sides. And it is only fairly recently that those two technologies have actually been happily married together. You can still have terrible problems if you take your disk, which you've manipulated in freehand, Illustrator, PageMaker or Quark Express, to a print house and they suddenly discover, oh, we haven't got the right resolution images, or your fonts aren't the right fonts. Or indeed, we haven't got the right screen size to actually print your image out in the screen size that you set on your technology. So what I'm going to do is very quickly construct a page. Now, as with the A4 page size that you had to select at the start there, or if at any size of a piece of paper that you're going to use, this technology, this digital technology for paper-based production, is dominated by paper, is dominated by the language of print technology, which has existed since, well, way before Gutenberg's time, but Gutenberg obviously with his movable type. And that movable type technology has influenced the design of this page. Everything from leading, for instance. Here we have the leading, which is the size of space between text, is taken directly from the old technique of placing strips of lead between fonts when you have them on your metal typefaces laid out in a tray in order to make the printed page. What I'm going to do very quickly is just place an image, and I'll just find that image for you. Here we go. Show files. Right, we're going to place some text actually to start with. Now this is a piece of text which I've just brought in from another page, and here we have the text laid out on the screen. We can zoom in to that so you can see the text actually constructed there. This is text that was taken from a recent publication of PageMaker. Here we go. We can manipulate this text in that we can drag these elements here. We can also place an image, and if I just get one off here from a recent MEDIASPACE. Okay, let's take time zones image. This is a very large image file. It's a TIFF image, and TIFF images have to be large in order that the data can be produced. My computer's talking to me now. That image contains a lot of data. Now, that data doesn't really want to be stored inside your PageMaker document, because the size of your document then on disk would be the size of the actual document plus the size of this image. This image is actually 15 megabytes, which is pretty big. It's actually A3 size, it's a double page spread size image, and it's at 300 dpi in black and white, and I haven't used any compression in the image, which you can do with TIFF images. So what I'm going to do here is click No, which means I don't actually want to import that image into this document. What I'm going to do is leave the contents of that image, all of that mass of data, outside of this document, and I'm going to import just the picked image of that. And here we have the picked image. You can see it's not particularly high resolution when it's on the screen here like this. I'm going to scale that image down a little bit and place that there. Now I can do all sorts of things with this text and image, but I'm not really going to do that now because it just takes too long, and that's not the point of this program. What I wanted to illustrate is that, first of all, the way pages work is actually inherited from the way paper works. The way images are actually placed within these electronic documents responds to data sizes and storage material. So, for instance, floppy disks, for instance, which people used to use to transmit these things around, carry these things around, can't contain a 16 megabyte image. So the file size was kept as small as possible, and as larger data storage mechanisms have been developed, like hard disks and FireWire drives and zip drives and Jazz drives, we can now store a lot more data. That's actually made people very lazy about the way they actually handle and manipulate data. The other point about this is that most of these technologies, most of these publications actually have the ability to export the page that you have before you onto an HTML document, and they then make links with all the images that you've got in there, and you can produce a fairly straightforward page-based HTML document. The other problem with all of this stuff is issues to do with this transfer of digital content to an electronic format, or to actually the print medium. This is what we get. Which camera are we going to here? Over there, right. This is how it actually comes out the other end when it's being printed from a disk. This is a piece of lith film. It's transparent, and this was for a two-color process-separated image that we used quite a few years ago now. You can see it's transparent, and that is actually placed over a lith plate, and using very old-fashioned technology of shining light onto an inked surface, you then get a plate like this, which can be wrapped around a drum. And this plate, when it's wrapped around a drum, can then be coated with ink. The ink sticks to the place where the grease isn't, and it can then be printed. And this is, of course, where the difficulty happens when you actually try and get what's on the screen onto this. One of the significant problems of that is colors that you use. This here is a Pantone swatch here, color swatch, which has all of the colors that you might need to produce a range of printed material. There are whole different types of coloured ones here. I don't think this has got any metallic inks. The problem with paper-based material is that if you're outputting it onto a piece of paper, you get this problem of having to deal with the inks that the printer actually has. And to standardize inks, which is of course a very well, it's not a very accurate science in terms of mixing inks. You then have to match the inks that you see on the screen to the inks that you have on this swatch, because that's the colour that the printer will have. They won't have the colour that you have on the screen because it uses a completely different technology. This uses cyan, magenta, yellow and black to mix full colour process ink, and the screen uses RGB, red, green and blue. Now, there are millions of colours of inks that you can use to generate paper-based publication. One of the problems that you have with web design is that if you're getting it onto a screen, you actually only have a certain number of colours to deal with, because the web graphics really generally deal with 256 or 216 colours across the two platforms. Of course, you can have millions of colours and thousands of colours with JPEG images and things like that, but actually screens have traditionally only shown 256 colours, and to actually get an image down to a reasonable quality, then 216 colours, 216 colours gives you a reasonable reproduction of a high-powered image on a 72 dpi screen. So I'm now going to move on to some web design. If we were to output this as an HTML document, we would have a page and a page mentality, and this is something that I'd like in the next section to question. Why are we using pages to talk about information that's actually on a far more liquid mechanism? So while I set up for the next stage, we're just going to run the VT and see you in a minute. Okay, hi. How does a web work? Well, it's fairly straightforward. You have lots of computers connected together by bits of wire, and data is transmitted between them, and it all works just like that. Of course, it was designed originally to withstand nuclear attack, and it's quite amazing that actually somebody can flick a button somewhere in Exeter and the whole southwest suddenly gets disconnected and doesn't really require an atomic bomb to dismantle the internet. It's a lot easier to do than that. What we have here is a map of the world, kind of. This map of the world shows a graphical representation of what the web might be like. And the notion of it being a web is interesting because it is effectively just a network thrown over the landscape, thrown over huge pieces of geographical space, which are linked with wires, fiber optic cables, and allow computers to talk to each other. Now, the idea was, when you had this network, was that if a message failed to get through one of these wires, it can actually be transferred down another wire. But the interesting thing about that is that the notion of web design is not to do one too many, but to allow that process to be replicated, but also those many to respond back to each other. By having a two-way dialogue, people can actually interact with each other. Now, this program, if somebody rings in, will be fairly interactive. We can talk one person to one person, so a member of the audience is responding back. But if you look at the way a web page works, you log on to a server and you download all of that information onto your hard disk, which first of all makes the whole process asynchronous, because to get that information, you don't all need to look at it at the same time in order to get that data. And a little bit maybe like a paper-based publication. You go and buy a newspaper. People buy it at different times. The news is generally related to the day of sale of the newspaper. But people don't read it all at the same time. One of the problems with television, if you haven't got a VCR, is that it's broadcast out, and if you miss it, it's gone. Now, with the broadcast that's happening now on the web, 8 seconds in the future, or if you're looking at it on the web, this happened 8 seconds in the past. What we're seeing there is a new notion of technology where, yes, it's broadcasting or a webcast. People are watching it, they're viewing it on their web browsers. But maybe at the same time they're simultaneously emailing in, or they're actually referring to the bulletin board and talking to us on that as well. So we have a kind of fragmentation of those structures that existed before. Now, if you look at the web as being a global thing rather than as being a computer-based thing, we can start talking about it in a slightly different way than we would talk about paper-based material. So the old notion of PageMaker generating a page, which is then taken to a publisher or a printer, which is then printed and then published and driven around the countryside to various shops where it's sold. We're now looking at something where people come to you to look at your information. What I've got here behind me are a series of web pages. It's actually the same web page which I've just duplicated here. But this is one of the models that people can use when they construct web pages. And in many ways it follows the notion of a book. You could see these as double-page spreads here. And somebody would actually move from one page to the next page to the next page in a very linear motion. Probably extremely boring to use. It doesn't give much flexibility. If you want to get down to information which is actually catalogued at the end here, you have a very long route, number of clicks to get there. A more interesting model is a kind of branching model where at every one of these levels here, we've just got 3 levels, you make a choice about which location you want to go to. So you reach here, the information has been subdivided to 3 pages, you click on one of these, you then go to these pages at the bottom. This branching process, this branching model for web design is fairly useful. But again, it's also limited in that if you want to jump about between this page here and that page there, you have to go back up in the hierarchy of page designs that you've constructed and then move left or right to that location. What we have here is a hub notion of a web design page, and this actually has at the center of it this central image, which will be the index page, and linked from it are all the other pages. This allows you to jump to information from that page and back again. Now, of course, these are fairly boring ways of dealing with information because there's no reason why you can't have web links on each of these pages or in each of the other models that I've looked at, which actually allow you instant access to all of these locations. This image that you see before you here is a reproduction, it's just a screen grab of the image that forms the folder hierarchy on the Kiostar website. What you have here is a central image, which is the index document, index.html. Convention, if you put index.html, then your server technology won't allow people to see all of these files within inside there. And an index.html or index.htm, depending on whether it's a Mac or a PC server, or indeed how you've configured it, allow you to frame each directory. So each of these directories here, each of these folders, has its own index.html with inside it. Now, I've also got here an image folder where all the images that are used by this HTML document are based. Now, by clicking on that document, you can then move to any one of these, and by actually laying it out like this in the folder that I contain, the web page or the website, it's actually quite easy to see the structure of it. This is, excuse me, this is one of the folders that you see, you saw at the higher level there, and that doesn't actually use a hub method of navigating through it. You actually have the index document somewhere at the back here, and then all of these documents actually flow through from a list. They're located over there. We've also got a Flash or a Shockwave document down there as well. And within this directory, there are several other directories that allow you to burrow down within. So we're moving from a hub structure to a linear structure, then back again to a hub structure, depending on which method is actually appropriate to the model that we're using. This is actually the EURONET web page. This is the website here. We have the index document, which is just above my head here, and then all of these higher level documents are in the same directory. Over here we have an index document for each web course, which actually takes you into another document over there. The reason that is like that is that when we were constructing it, we had several people working on this at the same time, and it just allowed us to give responsibility for each course at the top there, and then the folder could just be updated very simply. It's managing websites that actually get complicated. If you don't have a method of naming your documents, if you don't have a common method of naming the folders that you have within each of the folders, it can become very complicated. So basic kind of process is to use index.html or index.htm for your index documents with an image folder, which allows those images to be updated if you want to. Now, the problem with all those methods is that they're actually just documents, and if you see them like that, then they just look like pages in a book. And what I'm trying to do with this whole series of programs is to reevaluate what web design might be, and to look at new models of actually playing and exploring this new dimension. Because after all, when you use the web, you don't feel like you're turning pages, well, depending on what website you're looking at. Maybe what you feel like is that you're traveling through places, you're actually exploring something which is multi-dimensional or has another dimension to it at least, rather than just the flat two-dimensional. I think I've shown you this before. This is a project by Kate Bryant, who's a web designer. I think she's based in London at First Image at the moment. It's just a movie of the document, but it shows the main navigation of that document, of the project. Each one of these portals that we fly through here, and there's 3 of them all together, marks a different axis on a 3-dimensional model, which has allowed her to construct or place inside it a database of images. And this front end gives you a sense of actually traveling to that data, to that information. And when you get there, each one of these interfaces that you see exploding behind you there's one. Here's another interface, just approaching here. And we fly through again to another interface. This 3-dimensional axis allows you to categorize information in a very flexible way. And then within this, you can actually explore it how you want to. But this sense of travel is quite important. One of the interesting things about the web is that, as with the 8-second delay in this transmission that's happening on the webcast, the time things actually take to get to you over the internet do not necessarily rely on physical distance or geographical distance. It's as much to do with the technological limitations that a server or a particular or traffic on a particular line might have, as it is to do with distance. So there is an interesting parallel between time and space that occurs within cyberspace. Let's move on here. This is something by Steve Smith, who was watching the last program on the internet. It's his Radio Cube, and I think this explores some of those issues to do with travel and interaction. This is a 3-dimensional model we have here of Europe, actually, which you can travel through like this. When you actually get there, you can hear the radio station that's actually been broadcast in that location. So this is Düsseldorf, this is Paris, Barcelona and London. And as you travel through this three-dimensional space, you find yourself traveling through geographical space as marked by these broadcasts, these radio broadcasts. And radio broadcasts are interesting when you're dealing with geographical space because, of course, radio broadcasts, if you travel up the country, frequencies change depending on the band of the radio station. Now, this could equally be a navigation system for navigating through a website. It was constructed in Director, and in this case it's still running in Director, but it could equally be run within a shockwave version. Here we have an interesting idea. What happens when you do connect to a website? This is part of the fragmented and liquid spaces designed by one of our students, Mark. And if I just move through this, you can see here we have a city, simulation of a city or simulation of different spaces, which can be linked together. So if I link that space to that space, we not just travel to that space, but we bring the two spaces together. So what actually happens here is exactly what happens with the telephone conversation. When you dial somebody up and get through to them, those two spaces actually merge into that duration of that telephone conversation. And here what we have are these spaces which merge and converge as communications between them are actually made. Now it's through looking at these different models of dealing with structures that we can start questioning the nature of cyberspace. And here we have another one. Because of the questioning of cyberspace is important because you're actually traveling through it. And by traveling through it, you're actually creating it. As indeed you do with this. By going somewhere, you actually construct and map the spaces that you're exploring. This piece is by Mark Swift. And let's move on now to another structure by Aaron Haynes. This is another three-dimensional structure. It doesn't actually navigate, but what it allows you to do is to manipulate the forms that exist within it. So by fixing these surfaces, by making them static, we can then move through three-dimensional space and stretch them out, keeping those spaces static, whilst the nature of the rest of the architecture is fluid and it's changing. There we go. And this is a convolving space which allows you to manipulate three dimensions and manipulate the transfer of information and also the conversation and dialogues that can exist within it. Now, we don't have to look at new forms in which to do that. We don't have to look at new structures really to explore these things because many structures that have existed historically can be used to articulate cyberspace. What I've got here is a building that was designed by Jeremy Bentham in 1856, I think it was. It was called the Panopticon. He's an interesting chap. He's actually still around with us 250 years later. This is him here as he sits stuffed inside a cabinet in University College London. His auto icon that he left behind, a useful sort of contribution to humanity, was this remnants of him which are actually wheeled into University College London Senate meetings so that people can actually see the founder of the college. What he actually constructed was a concept, an information concept for controlling people, and this was the Panopticon. The Panopticon was actually a proposal for a prison, which was never actually built, and so what remains of it, like many architectural pieces, the theory and the concept behind it is left, and that concept, in the case of the Panopticon, is incredibly powerful, and actually has a lot of usage within the internet. The idea of the Panopticon was that it was a prison, and as you can see here, we have a central column Around the sides here are the locations for all the prisoners, and a guard can sit, there's the guard actually sitting in the central column, and can view all of the prisoners at the same time. Escape is therefore extremely difficult. Here's a top view of the plan. We have each of these cells here running up the inside. If you want information on the Bentham project, you can see that on the University College London website, where a lot of this information is actually stored and the history of Bentham. Here we have another plan, and indeed this plan has been used to construct a virtual reality model of Bentham's Panopticon, not for surveillance of individuals within a prison, but for a model for allowing individuals within a virtual environment to actually interact with each other. This is an image grab of an early version of that model, and here you can see one of the occupants of that virtual reality space represented as an avatar. What I'm going to do now is just kick up Netscape, and we're going to look at some of the VRML models that we've constructed. Hi again. What I've got here is a VRML document which is read into Netscape, another plugin. This was constructed originally in a 3D Max program, 3D Studio Max, which is a 3D modeling program. And this has allowed us then to export it as a VRML document and placed inside a Dreamweaver document and then viewed through Netscape. And if we can see this on the chroma key, you can see me moving around this three-dimensional space. And if I click here, this takes us out to a view of the building. I'm using Cosmo Player here, which allows us to view, it's a plugin which allows us to view three-dimensional spaces. And we can move around the layers of this building, this virtual building, by using these tools here. We can also use this tool at the bottom to look up and down. I've got a whole range of models here, and I'll just take you through a few of them before we start the web workshop. This model here is the place where students will be able to move into and place their own VRML files. And this is based on a drawing of the Adoration of the Magi by Leonardo da Vinci. And you can see it actually has some of the similar physical properties, i.e. the stairs work, and gravity should work, oops, I fell down the stairs, as the real world has. Here we have a one-to-one space that was created for tutorials between a lecturer and the student. And this is based on a De Chirico painting. If you're familiar with the artworks, you can see that they contain two shadowy figures somewhere in the background. And the interesting thing about this space, which were actually built by Glenn Kavanagh for us, is that they have an odd physics to them, the way the lens is constructed, but also the whole piece is constructed on a very acute slant to give the impression of the physics of a De Chirico space. This here is the archive space where all of the information concerning the running of the program. This will be a three-dimensional, an online MSc program that we're constructing. This is based on the Monument of the Third Republic, originally designed by Tatlin, and we can move into these spaces, which were designed originally for housing the center of the Communist Party. Each one of these spaces actually rotates at a slightly different speed, but makes a useful model for exploring any archiving or administrative process. And this one here is modeled on Moholy-Nagy's three-dimensional structures, which were constructed for the film The Shape of Things to Come, but also emulate the three-dimensional kinetic sculpture, the light modulator, which he designed in the 30s here. This is a place that you can access information. And again, has many of the same similar physical properties like stairs, which you can walk up and down, or just jump off. We'll now go to the student space as the last one here. This is an individual space that students can have based on St. Jerome's study. And you can see here, this has some more sophisticated rendering in the background here. You can also, if you're quick, just catch some birds through the back window. Let's just go back outside. Here we have some birds flying around out there. Probably the same seagulls we had out the back this morning. Right, okay, so Netscape, it's a useful tool. What it actually does, it's really the equivalent of a television which views the transmitted signal. The transmitted signal would be created on the server and various pages using Dreamweaver. What I'll do now is just knock together very quickly a web page in Dreamweaver. In the same way that a page makeup application has a page architecture to it, Dreamweaver, or indeed the language, the HTML language, has embedded in it several commands which allow you to construct a architecture for a web page. And the most useful way of doing that is to use a table. Now the table, which I think we showed you in the last program, has a very simple structure to it. And what we're going to do is set precisely the width of this just to 350, which is the same width as we've used for the Kaia website. We won't have a border and we'll have no cell padding. This here is a simple table. We can view that in HTML. And we can see here the command for table, TD and TR, and the width, the border size here, and the cell spacing. If you actually want to know how an HTML page is constructed, you simply download the source of that HTML, and then you can hack into it yourself and add your own images. Now what we're going to do here is place an image, and I'm just going to find the MEDIASPACE site, which is in now. Where's it gone? Desktop. Okay. This is the MEDIASPACE site, and we'll look in the images here, and we're going to find a few of these images which have been already diced up using free Firewire. Let's have a look here to where have we got the map? We've got some images in here. Okay. There we go. All right. Some of these are quite large images. We're going to find a smallish one. These are all being compressed using JPEGs. Here we have one from the interstices one. Right, I'll save this. Oops. Create a new folder. I've got to set the root, sorry, I've made a mess of that. Here we have an image which is put in place there. What you need to do is obviously to get all your images in the same folder so they're not placed all over. And what I'll do is save the image from the document that I created before. Where's it gone? Now. Right now. Okay. These are the documents we have for the Kaia website. What I was looking for was an image here, which is the trace images. Let's take that one. All I'll do is save this. We'll call this index. Actually, I'll do it lowercase. It's always useful to have a common convention for your pages, as Neil Dare Williams found out when he originally designed the Kaia website. when we moved, save cache, okay, that's all right. And oops. Here we go. And if you press F12, which is a setup for Netscape, we can view that image inside that table. So there's that image. Now if we want to play around with the size of that image within Dreamweaver, we can resize it like that. We can add a link to it through here to a new document if we created one. I'll do is save this as index 2. And if we then go back to index HTML, which is the original one. Oh, I've broken a link with that. There it is. Okay. What I can do is place on here a link to index 2, and then when I view it in Netscape, by clicking on that, it simply takes me to that original page there. Now, if we look at this image here, it was taken originally from a Sony camera and loaded into Photoshop and manipulated, and then placed inside Fireworks and exported using this export tool here, which then allows you to change the resolution of that image. Now we're not actually going to do that now because it actually takes too long, and we're actually running out of time. I think we've only got a few minutes left. Let's cancel that. Now, what you'll be able to do on the website is call in and see the courses, which are now I think we have enough people to actually run the web courses. If you'd like to log on to that, contact MEDIASPACE at soc.plim.ac.uk. You'll be able to view these courses that are up. What we really require is people to take part in the email narrative and also the image narrative, which has been set up on that. Once we know who's actually taking part in this course, we'll be able to let everybody else know through the bulletin board. I'd like to thank Prasad, who logged on from India, and also Jay Miller, who logged on to us from the States as well, which is quite comforting to know that somebody's actually looking at this stuff and using the website as well. So we're now running out of time. How long have we got, Dave? 30 seconds before we run out of time. Dave tells me, open his little office up there. And in those 30 seconds, what I'm going to do is get on with trying to model the next TV program using Lego here. Luckily, I've thought about this beforehand, and I'm not going to save that. Constructed something in a 3D document here. Here we go. Okay. Well, see you next time while I kick up these three-dimensional Lego bricks, these virtual ones. Take care. Bye.